to Todd Talk. Today I want to tell you about my trip to Santa Fe.
Todd Talk is brought to you by Burrito Cow. It's muy caliente.
I'm fortunate enough that I've gotten to do a pretty fair amount of travel in the United States. I've done a lot of the usual suspects. I've been to Chicago, I've been to New York, I've been to Las Vegas, I've been to New Orleans. And I've found that I'm looking for places now that are a little bit more interesting and off the beaten path. A couple years ago when I was in Las Vegas, I went to an exhibit called Omega Mart. Omega Mart is an attraction. It's sort of a art exhibit that looks like a fake grocery store. And as you get into it, it starts to open up into a factory and an office building and a village, and it kind of all ties together in this really interesting story. Very, very fun, and I found it very, very compelling. The company that created Omega Mart is called Meow Wolf. And I also went to their exhibit in Denver that's called the Convergence Station. Totally different concept, but similar kind of idea as far as a exhibition that you engage with, and there's a narrative and all of that. Their original installation is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so that was one of the motivations for going there. There's also just a lot of art and a lot of great food, and it just sounded like a really interesting place. Now, I'm quite a planner, so I book these sorts of things months in advance. When I booked my flight, I was going to fly out at 11 a.m., but because things get moved around and rescheduled, I ended up having to fly out at 5:30 a.m. So my mom was nice enough to drive me to the airport super early in the morning. Didn't get much sleep, being excited and having to get up so early and all of that. Got to the airport, hung out, had some breakfast, got on the plane, and flew down to Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix is a really big city and a really big airport. It was very, very busy and really just kind of interesting for people watching. I recently bought myself a new camera. And one thing this camera can do is what they call a snap focus. So I can pick a focal length, and when I touch the screen, it will just take a picture instantly at that focal length. So you don't really have to focus or point or do anything. It's very kind of discreet, and it's designed that way so that you can take pictures of people, kind of street photography. And so I did a little bit of that. While I was hanging out at the airport, I took some pictures of people that looked interesting, or these little kind of travel vignettes. And it was kind of a fun, creative exercise in photography. After a couple hours, I got on a tiny little plane and flew from Phoenix to Santa Fe. Speaking of tiny, Santa Fe Airport is the smallest airport I've ever flown into. It is small. Like, there's one gate. So I grab my luggage and then I go to pick up my rental car, and it is an absolute nightmare. Again, being a planner, I had booked my rental car months in advance, and I get a discount through my employer, and so I was expecting to show up, get my keys, and go. And I had an email that said, here's your confirmation number, go pick up your car. And when I get there, they ask me for some voucher number, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. And they're like, well, we don't either, you should have that. So they encourage me to call corporate. So I call corporate and I tell them what's going on, and they say, well, do you have a confirmation number? And I say, I do. And they're like, yeah, everything looks great. They should just give you the keys. And I tell the people at the counter this, and they're like, well, we can't because you don't have this number. And so then they have me call somebody else, and then the person's like, yeah, there's a confirmation number. It's, this, and there's a voucher number, and it's this. And I give that to the people at the desk, and they're like, yeah, we see that, but it doesn't work. The thing that was the most frustrating is, I had an email that said, you're ready to go. You have your car, you have your confirmation number, go get it. And when I called, they said, yeah, you've got your confirmation number, go get it. And the people at the counter couldn't figure it out. And somehow, through all of that, after I've paid for the thing and made my reservation and all that, they still made it my problem. So once they rebooked my reservation, I took a shuttle down to my car, got my keys, and off I went. The shuttle people were all really nice, and the car was fine. It's just that whole experience of somehow making it my problem that they couldn't figure out how their systems worked. The car rental company rhymes with Davis. I'll let you figure that out. So when I arrived, it was raining. And the weather in Santa Fe can be really tricky. It was snowing the week before I got there, and so I had my fingers crossed that I would get some decent weather. So Santa Fe is not a very big city. Albuquerque is the big city in New Mexico, and about an hour north is Santa Fe. And Santa Fe is small enough that there's like no freeways or anything. There's just kind of the main drag through the middle of town. The whole thing from end to end is probably about 7 miles. So I drove down the main drag and eventually got to my motel. And my motel was really, really charming. The motel was built back in the 30s. It's expanded since then, but it still has that kind of charming, small, roadside kind of look. And it's on what used to be Route 66. The room wasn't much to speak of. It was just a bed, bathroom, that kind of thing. It was kind of poorly lit. There was some nice art on the wall, but it was exactly what I was kind of hoping for. Like I said, the property was really charming. There's kind of this central area with a courtyard and lots of gravel parking and just all of these buildings. And I just really, really enjoyed my time there. For dinner, I went to a restaurant called Maria's. Maria's has been there since the 1950s. It's kind of a family-owned situation, and they have a whole menu of margaritas, and then, of course, their food menu. I had a really nice margarita, and then I had their blue corn enchiladas. New Mexico is really all about their green chilies. Green chilies come from the region, and they kind of pride themselves on that. So often when you order something, they'll ask you, do you want red or green? And in this case, I did both. After dinner, I headed back to the hotel, and the hotel lobby has one of the best cocktail bars in town called La Reina. And it's a neat space, very bright and kind of airy, and a really well done menu. The next day I got up and I went to their historic downtown. Downtown, which is at the north end of the city, is really kind of touristy, lots of museums, lots of history, and it's just a really, really neat space. I spent some time wandering around, just checking out the shops and the restaurants and that sort of thing, and then I went to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. Georgia O'Keeffe was a painter. She was born in the late 1800s and she died in the late 1900s. A very, very interesting person. The museum sort of takes you through her life and a lot of what she went through as far as influences and relationships, things like that. And it was really informative as far as why her art looks the way it looks. Very early on, she was recognized as a very talented artist, and she fell in with a group of other artists and photographers, and she married a man who was much, much older than her, who was kind of a creep, but exposed her to a lot of other art and artists. Among them were these European photographers, and what they liked to do was take photographs of things and then blow them up to proportions where things became abstract. Many of her paintings are of flowers or bones or trees or other natural elements, and she would do them often in a very abstract way and where they filled the entire frame. I found it really inspiring how much her experience sort of informed what she did as far as art. The whole thing was really, really worthwhile, and if you're in New Mexico, I highly recommend. I also went to the New Mexico History Museum, which was quite a story. It starts way, way back in like the 1400s and 1500s when the Spanish came over and sort of invaded the space of the Native American people. And there was lots of fighting, and the Native Americans killed all the Spanish people, and then more Spanish people came over. And then the Spanish people killed all the Native American people, and then they kind of figured out some sort of equilibrium where they just accepted each other. And then the Americans came in, and they wanted to live there too, but Spanish and the Native Americans killed the Americans. And the Americans didn't like that, so they started to build forts. And of course, forts mean there's going to be fighting. And eventually the Spanish and the Americans agreed, and they drew some borders, and then the Native Americans were like, what are you guys doing? Spoilers, it wasn't great for the Native Americans. In 1912, Arizona and New Mexico became states, sort of reluctantly. Shortly thereafter, there was a world war, and a lot of New Mexicans died. And then in a little town called Los Alamos in New Mexico, they invented a nuclear bomb. So lots of really just wild stuff in New Mexico history. I had lunch at a place called the Coyote Cafe. It was a nice rooftop bar, so I had a beautiful view, gorgeous blue skies on this day. And I ate a cheeseburger that, of course, had green chilies on it, and I had a margarita. After lunch, I wandered up the street to a cathedral. I've been to a couple of cathedrals. I've been to one in San Francisco, I've been to one in New Orleans, and now the one in Santa Fe. And I'm not particularly religious, but what I find fascinating about them is just the architecture and the pomp. Like the decor and the flair is pretty over the top. You know, and some of it's really, really impressive. Sometimes the stonework, stained glass, really, really impressive to see. Just down the street from the cathedral, there's a little chapel, tiny chapel. It's called the Loretto Chapel. And the thing that's interesting about the Loretto Chapel is it is home to what they call the miraculous staircase. Now, the chapel is pretty tall, but it's not a big footprint. And the story goes that they wanted to put the choir up in a balcony. But since there's not a lot of room, they didn't have a way of building a staircase. And in the late 1800s, reportedly, a man came along and said, "I'll build you a staircase." And he built a spiral staircase, a double helix, out of wood using a saw and an angle, no glue, no nails. And when you see it, it's pretty miraculous. It's a really well done staircase. Now, they added the handrails a couple years later. So you can imagine just the staircase would have been pretty harrowing just to climb that. So that's why they added the handrails. And they don't let you climb it anymore just for, preservation reasons. But yeah, it's a really, really neat sort of artifact. For dinner, I went to a place called Paloma. When I did my research, it came up on a lot of lists of good restaurants in Santa Fe. It was a little bit more upscale, not like you needed to dress up, but like you needed to pay for your chips and your salsa. But the chips and salsa were incredible. They gave you like actual fried tortillas that hadn't been busted up and 4 different types of salsa. Some of them were really spicy, some were really tasty. It was worth the money. I had a great cocktail and I had their fish tacos, which were very, very worthwhile. After dinner, I went back to my hotel, and on Wednesday nights, they had free music. And so there was a fella singing and playing guitar named Devin Champlin. He's the songwriter and I think lead singer from the band Sons of Rainier. He was really, really great, and there was a pretty sizable crowd for the little hotel bar. While I was sitting there, just hanging out, having a cocktail, listening to some folk music, I got a high heart rate notification on my watch. While I was literally just sitting there, my watch said, "Hey, you have a heartbeat of 121 beats per minute and you're not doing anything." So I checked it out and I was like, yeah, my heart is like beating out of my chest. What's going on? So I kind of thought about it and I was like, what's different? Well, I'm on vacation, so there's some excitement there. I am drinking. And then I looked up, what's the elevation of Santa Fe? Well, it turns out Santa Fe is at 7,200 feet. It's almost 2,000 feet higher than Denver. So I did a little bit more research, and compared to where I live at 500 feet of elevation, there is 25% less oxygen in Santa Fe. I didn't really have any ill effects. The whole time I felt like I had just run. I was kind of always out of breath or feeling like I needed to take a deeper breath. But I never felt like nauseous or dizzy or anything like that. So I just kind of kept an eye on things, just made sure I didn't drink too much. The thing with drinking is it sort of slows your breathing and your heart rate, and it also dilates your blood vessels, which means less oxygen. Next day I got up, I got some coffee, and I went to the Meow Wolf exhibit in Santa Fe that's called the House of Eternal Return. This one definitely felt like their first exhibit. It wasn't quite as polished, but it was equally as impressive as the other ones. The story in this one was that there's this family lives in this house, And they were all very smart, very creative. And they sort of stumbled across something where they sort of evaporated into their own imagination. It's hard to explain and kind of open to interpretation. But when you walked in to this exhibit, you literally were standing in front of this 2-story house. And as you went in, you could explore every single room and touch everything and learn about them. And then you sort of branched off into these spaces and these places that were kind of based in their minds and their imagination. It was really, really well done, really wonderful. Every time I've been to a Meow Wolf exhibit, whether it's Omega Mart, Convergence Station, or House of Eternal Return, taken me about 2.5 hours to kind of go through and see everything. 2 of them, I very much engaged in the story and really dug in and tried to uncover the mystery. One of them, I just went and just sort of wandered around just to see what is it like to just be there and just soak it all in. But yeah, each time, about 2 hours is what I would budget if you go check one out. After Meow Wolf, I went back downtown and sort of wandered around, did some people watching and poked into some shops. I went to their Capitol building. Santa Fe happens to be the capital of New Mexico. And what's interesting is it's the first Capitol building that I've ever seen that doesn't have a dome on top of it. Many of the United States Capitol buildings are based off of our national Capitol, which has a big dome on top of it. But this one, it's a round building, but no dome. I then wandered over to a place called Kawaka Chocolate House. They make all kinds of little chocolates and caramels and drinking chocolates. Really, really yummy stuff. And for dinner this night, this was my fancy dinner. I went to a restaurant called Radish and Rye. It was a really nice space. Everybody was really, really cool. And the food was exquisite. I had a really nice cocktail. I just ordered a green salad, and then I had their blackened snapper. The salad had these radishes on there that are called watermelon radishes. They were really, really interesting, very, very good. And then the snapper was on top of some rice that had asparagus in it and some butter and that sort of thing. And one thing that's interesting about this trip is both at Paloma and at Radish and Rye, I had dessert. I like sweets. I like chocolate and I like gummy bears and all of that, but I don't usually buy dessert when I go out to dinner. But this time, both times I did. Next day I got up and I went back downtown. On my way there, while I was driving along and I kind of looked over at a berm, there were prairie dogs. Here in my part of the world, we've got squirrels everywhere, but there were prairie dogs. While I was downtown, I wandered along a street called Canyon Road. It's just a lot of galleries, local art, that sort of thing. And then I went over to their modern art museum. The modern art museum was pretty small, but a really well done and nicely curated exhibit. It had to do mostly with shadow and light, and all of these artists sort of expressed that in different ways. There were a few things in the museum that were pretty out there, pretty wild, and then there were other things that I thought were really, really interesting and really thoughtful. And then a few things that were just totally different than anything I'd ever run across. So I went back to my motel, and when I got there, I saw that there was a little burger pop-up that was setting up. And so I decided I'll grab a burger. And when I went back out there, the line had exploded. There were so many people. They're apparently very, very popular. And they sort of just do one thing. They call themselves One Trick Pony Burger. And it's just a burger that's smashed with onions, and they put pickles and a special sauce, cheese, and that's it. That's what's on the menu. So I waited in line and I got my burger, and it was fantastic. So after I ate my burger, I hung out in the motel bar, and it was pretty busy. There was a lot of people hanging out, eating burgers, having drinks, and it was a really good opportunity to practice some of my discreet portrait photography. And I got some really great pictures. The people in Santa Fe, they're just so artsy and so different. Some people felt like they were like right out of a Wes Anderson movie. And some of these pictures I got were like these sort of accidental Baroque paintings or just these really cool moments. And it was a really fun exercise again in creative photography. Next day, I got up, checked out of my motel, and on the other side of the airport, there's a little pull-off, a little dirt road where there are some petroglyphs. So I decided to check that out. Now here in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of our trails are through forests and among trees. Out there, you felt very exposed. Lots of cactus, lots of rocks, kind of had to boulder over some things. And I was afraid the whole time that I was going to run into either a rattlesnake or tarantula. Fortunately, I ran into neither. At the top of all of these rocks, I discovered the petroglyphs, and they are really bizarre. There's just so many of them all clustered together, and it's just weird to think that these things are 300-400 years old and still just kind of sitting there on these rocks. After looking at the petroglyphs, I went down to the airport, got all checked in, got on a plane, flew to Houston. From Houston, I flew back to Portland, got in pretty late, and that's that. If ever you're down that way, I highly recommend visiting. It is a really weird place. It just is kind of its own thing. It's far enough away from everything else that it just has its own feel, its own style, its own food, its own culture, and it's just a really fun, really kind of special place.